Okay, so what I'll show you is what I have is I maintain my testing environment or my testing framework. I guess you could call it a sandbox if you want. But what I have is a Pulumi configuration written in TypeScript that manages a consistent configuration across four AWS regions worldwide. So I have a single program or a single stack. Well, I have a single project, which is the infrastructure, 4 stacks, 1 stack for each region. And the code is parameterized so that as I change, all I have to do is change the stack and then it'll spin up in that region, looking up resources for that region, like the right AMIs and so on and so forth in that region. And then building on top of that, I have another stack which references the first one, which then will spin up some limited number of instances to then enable me to do the things that I need to do. Most of my focus is around Kubernetes. And in particular, working on a project called Cluster API, which allows you to define Kubernetes clusters as a Kubernetes resource. And then you're using the Kubernetes APIs to in turn manage Kubernetes clusters, which sounds a little of inception, but anyway. So what I have here is looking at my Git repo in the in this directory here. This is a Pulumi project, again, written in TypeScript. You can see that I have 4 different stacks for each of the 4 regions that I'm using, right? And then the one code file. And so if I actually just, and so the actual TypeScript code is in here. And so it's just written to, basically, like I said, I have maps set up to provide different values for different regions, different IP address values in different regions, et cetera, looking up AMIs per region, so on and so forth. And then spinning up a VPC, spinning up subnets, both private and public subnets, attaching internet gateways, creating security groups for various hosts, and then creating one instance, which is an SSH bastion host, which it's only traffic allowed as SSH into that host, and then that serves as the gateway by which we reach everything else inside there. And so what that looks like in a particular region is it would spin up all the necessary infrastructure and then create this one machine here. And then that one machine becomes the gateway by which I access everything else that's inside that area. And then the other, so this is one project with 4 stacks. And then on top of that, no, sorry, wrong directory. Then I have this project, again, with the same 4 stacks. And its purpose is to just spin up some instances, which I use is what are called management clusters. And so it will go and create instances inside the infrastructure that was created by the previous stack. And so we're just using a stack reference for that here to reference the stack. And then it will go up and spin up the additional instances. And so that's where you would get these machines here in each region. And then after that, I use some non-Pulumi stuff, Kubernetes native tools to bootstrap the initial Kubernetes cluster that I use for that region. And then that cluster becomes what we call a management cluster. And from there, I can create additional Kubernetes clusters as needed. And one of the other ways that I use Pulumi on top of this is I sometimes have a need to spin up additional test environments for various testing, and those are not regionalized. So I'll usually do my testing in a specific region, and so I don't end up creating multiple stacks. But in this case, for example, I've got a sort of a combined set of code in this TypeScript file that doesn't use the other previous stacks, but instead spins up an entirely new test environment across some region that I'll specify, and then it will go and create an independent VPC, independent subnets, independent internet gateways, NAT gateways, route table associations, security groups, et cetera, that I'll then consume for other testing purposes besides the sort of some more persistent infrastructure that I maintain that I showed you already. So it's not a complex environment, right? In that it's it's pretty simplistic. I create the base AWS infrastructure and then use stack references, Pulumi stack references from there to build on top of that infrastructure to add additional instances or whatever, right? That let me then spin up instances inside those environments as needed, and then tear them down while I can still leave the underlying infrastructure in place. And one of the things this has enabled me to do is as the project that I'm working on, which I mentioned earlier was Cluster API, as this has sort of developed very, very rapidly within the Kubernetes community, I can tear down test environments and or tear down this underlying framework in a particular region if I need to upgrade it to test a new build, or if I need to upgrade it to to change some piece of it, whatever. Like as the Kubernetes community was moving from V1 Alpha 2 to V1 Alpha 3, which is their internal sort of version nomenclature. There were some changes in there that you didn't necessarily want to upgrade in place from one to the other. Instead, you wanted to sort of build a new and then migrate over, right? And so using this Pulumi configuration, I was able to do that sort of worldwide in all my test regions in just a matter of like 10 to 15 minutes, right? Literally just the time it takes to run a Pulumi destroy and then a Pulumi up to tear down the existing infrastructure and then recreate it from scratch.